Good morning. Welcome to Channel 15. Today we have with us Russ Fox, Chair of the Southwick Select Board, and Carl Steinhardt, Chief Administrative Officer. And today we're going to talk about the upcoming town meeting. It's going to be on the 16th. And Russ, do you want to fill us in on some details?
Certainly, Dennis. Good morning if you're watching this in the morning. Good afternoon if you're watching it in the afternoon, and good evening if you're watching it in the evening. We have a special town meeting coming up on Tuesday, June 16th at 6 p.m. This is a special town meeting that will begin before the annual town meeting. It's going to take place at the Southwick Regional High School parking lot, similar to the last special town meeting that took place. This time we will have chairs available since it will be a longer evening for all of us. But let me begin by talking about the special town meeting, which is going to begin at 6 p.m. There are 3 articles. And Article 1 is the transfer from existing funds to cover negotiated agreements for staff for a total of 45 plus employees in the present fiscal year. These funds come from several salary reserve accounts and available funds set aside to cover these costs. Funds also cover backfill expenses for people out with on-the-job injuries and sickness, as well as existing services for COVID-19 response. And Mr. Steinhardt will add a little more on this article.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, this is our usual year-end transfers. It's a housekeeping issue. It addresses, we had a new health inspector come on, so we had to add some more hours there. We've had people that were out on sicknesses. So, when you bring in floaters and substitute clerks and substitute custodians, you have to deal with those issues. And then, of course, with the COVID-19, one of the big emphasis that was, instructed for us to do was to do additional cleaning. So we had to clean our buildings several times. And then going forward, we had to make sure that areas were constantly cleaned. And a good example of that was on Election Day.
Jump on Article number 2.
All right. Article number 2, but before I do to that, that total amount, in case Mr. Steinhardt didn't mention it, is $58,548.
That is correct.
Okay. Article 2, the town experienced snow and icing events beyond what was budgeted, some of which would require overtime in the use of outside hired vendors. The cost of road salt to treat roads contributed heavily to these expenses. This was allow the town to close out its books and balance without a snow and ice deficit as of June 30th of this year. Otherwise, the deficit would be added to next fall's tax bill. This is something that we do annually, and Mr. Steinhardt, would you comment on that one?
Again, it's an accounting measure to make sure that we are not going to be carrying overdue bills into the fall, where we would have to add that on to people's real estate tax bills. There's no need to do it. We have the funds to handle it with our books right now, and it's the right thing to do.
Okay, thank you. Article 3 is something that we have been doing on the advice of our auditors. And this article allows us to make our annual deposit to the Other Post-Employment Benefits, OPEB, trust fund established at a town meeting years ago. The town currently pays for post-employment health care expenses on a pay-as-you-go basis. This type of fund, which was authorized by state law, provides a tool for municipalities to recognize the liability and begin to cover future costs. Eventually, this fund will hold several $100,000 to cover health costs. Annually contributing to it is recommended by our outside independent auditors and is looked upon favorably by bond rating agencies, and the amount of this is $20,000.
That is correct, Mr. Chairman. That came up, in fact, that came up as a topic of discussion on our last bond rating meeting when we did the issue for $10.4 million last fall. And that was a bond issue that related to, roads, the North Pond land, and some other major projects, equipment acquisitions, fire, DPW, and so forth. So that was one of the issues that was brought up to make sure that that's being addressed by the rating agencies.
Good.
That covers the special town meeting, all 3 warrant articles. That occurs at 6 p.m. on June 16th, and we can move along to the actual annual town meeting.
Okay.
And our annual town meeting will begin at 6:15 p.m. Again, same location, Southwick Regional High School parking lot. The first probably 5 articles are what we refer to as housekeeping articles. What they are articles that give the authority to the Southwick Select Board and its staff to carry out the daily business of town government in between town meetings. These are articles that are placed on the annual town warrant every year. If people have any questions whatsoever, I'd ask them to give a call ahead to the Selectman's office. You can reach us at 413-569-5995, and they can refer you to the proper individual to give you an answer. Mr. Steinhardt, would you like to comment on the first 5 articles?
Yes, well, obviously, the election will have taken place next Tuesday, the 9th, and people should be coming in to vote for their candidates, because this is a democracy, and we want to make sure everybody takes advantage of that opportunity and right. And then in terms of the other ones, annual town report, we are a public corporation, so we're going to have the annual town report is actually online now on the town webpage, and we're going to have hard copies for people at election next week, as well as copies of the budget handbook. The article number 3, that's the selectmen's appointment of minor officers, which is individuals that would be the police, fire chiefs, myself, the town attorneys, and other department heads, because we are all considered minor officers below the select board level because they are the elected chief executive. And then article number 4, we periodically have to trade or sell obsolete equipment, and we have sales relating to that and bid openings. And we take that money in, it goes into the general fund, and it closes out to free cash, and it gets reappropriated at a future town meeting. And then the final one is the acceptance and application of grants from private sector, federal government, and the Commonwealth, and we are doing this all the time. Every week, every couple of weeks, the selectmen are always either applying for a grant from some entity or accepting one. And we just finished, Dennis, with the ADA plan. We just finished, that's an $18,000 grant from a state agency. And then we just got some other grants from Mass DOR for looking at our fiscal setup. So we're always getting grants. We got it for the town nurse for the COVID-19. We've gotten grants for police and fire, getting grants all the time. So this is a very important article, but it is a housekeeping article, and it happens all the time.
All right, then we'll go on to Article 6, and this is involves road work. This article authorized the select board as the road commissioners to bond for $1 million for road work. The town has a backload of roads that must be reconstructed, milled, or overlaid. The amount of the state aid known as Chapter 90 funds and local appropriations has not been sufficient enough to reduce the backlog. Action must be taken to remedy the problem and make sufficient progress. This is something we began last year as road commissioners. The voters were nice enough to authorize a $2 million bond issue last year. We're asking that this continue with a $1 million bond issue. We are trying to catch up on our roads. It's not just Southwick, it's every community is facing this. We have a backlog on roads, bridges, culverts, drainage. So we feel this is a necessity and something that we'd like to continue because roads are an extremely important part of a community to make sure people can travel safely, and it also is needed for economic benefit to our local business community. Mr. Steinhardt, anything to add?
Well, obviously, our Chapter 90 aid usually runs along the line of $180,000 for every 100 million, and we've only been getting the state's only been doing 200 million, so we've been getting about 370, thousand a year, and it's been recommended through studies that we should be getting like 400,000 to 600,000. So this is an important way to make up for that shortfall of what we're not getting from this state aid process.
Very good. Article 7. This article authorized $1.1 million for recommended masonry work and roof replacement at the Southwick Fire Station on Depot Street. The replacement arose from a municipal building condition study authorized by the 2018 town meeting. The firm of Ty and Bond conducted the assessment to examine town buildings and make recommendations to prioritize what work should be done and when. This was determined to be the most important project to be undertaken first. All municipal buildings are 20 or more years old. Their original bonds are rolling off and will be replaced by prioritized projects. And just so everyone understands, this masonry work has led to leakage into our fire station, which can cause serious damage. The roof is, we figure the roof is in need of replacement at this time. So we're combining both these projects to make sure that this building remain intact and in good order.
All right, Mr. Chairman, obviously last year, in the 2019 town meeting, they had authorized a borrowing up to $300,000 for the permitting and design and study options of what we were going to do. So that work was done in the last year, and now we're bringing those recommendations with an apparent low bidder because this project is all ready to go. So with the bidding costs in the mid 900,000s, we have to add on to that contingency and a clerk of the works function to oversee the project and represent the town. So that's what gets us to that number. And we are ready to go. I mean, this project has bids that have been received, and we need to carry out this project.
Okay, very good. Article 8 is to basically set up a revolving account fund, which is needed to place fees received for wetland permit applications into an account for uses related to the managing of Conservation Commission purposes and operations. This is something that we've been doing with several of our different boards and committees that collect fees. So these fees can go directly into account where monies could be used out of those accounts to address issues. And this particular one is for the Conservation Commission.
Right. And of course, Dennis, you have another capacity, and your other capacity is the Conservation Commission coordinator. So your board had identified this as something that needed to be addressed a number of years ago when they adopted updated wetland protection bylaws and regulations. So this is going to allow you to carry out those duties that are delineated under those bylaws and regulations.
Yes, very well put. Thank you.
Okay. Article 9 is basically approving the fiscal year 2021 budget. We will be going all over that. This is a recommendation by the Finance Committee. Finance Committee is appointed by the moderator, and then we work with the Finance Committee. We were able to successfully come up with a recommendation that both boards agreed to, and we will be presenting those findings to the voters and asking for their approval. Mr. Steinhardt, any other comments on that one?
Well, I mean, obviously, we held budget hearings in February and March before the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. And then we switched gears and proceeded to hold public meetings through the Zoom platform. So, and then, you know, not only our board, the select board meeting, but also the Finance Committee held its meetings through the Zoom platform. So there's been a significant amount of time and effort put in by the Finance Committee members, the accounting staff, the professional department heads, the select board, and other professionals to produce a responsible spending plan that reflects what our needs are now. And because of the issues with potential revenues, we've made sure that we have deferred on many items to a later date until we're able to resolve the issue with this crisis and its effect on the economy, as well as funds that come into the state treasury that are then distributed to cities and towns for aid that we use in the budget planning. So we are taking a very conservative approach with this budget, and it's only really going to have some public safety acquisitions in the forms of police and fire vehicles, and then Public Works is getting the bonding for the roads. Other than that, it's pretty well straightforward with just addressing fixed expenses and contractual obligations, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
Okay, Article 10.
Article 10. This article reauthorizes all revolving accounts to operate some town government functions for inspections and services. Without it, would require funds to come out of taxation. The Municipal Modernization Act was passed in 2016, which provided for a new manner in which revolving funds are regulated and managed. Article 10 is an article that we have seen annually now. This is similar to what Article 8, that we just created a revolving account for the Conservation Commission. There's a listing of the inspector's revolving account, boat ramp, police chief, lake revolving account, local lake permitting, custodial services, council on aging, sidewalks, and the list goes on.
Right, and Mr. Chairman, it actually includes Article 8, as if it's been approved, is also in the bottom of that. So if you see that, Dennis, you'll see that's been incorporated. So this is a great tool, and it allows us to help run the expenses of these other operations and efforts without having to place the burden on the taxpayer. It's the ratepayer, the person who actually gets the benefit of the service, is the one that's helping to contribute to this fund that pays for the expense of delivering that service to them.
And it should be noted that there's also set a spending limit so that we don't have to worry about that. Article 11, annual fiscal 21 budget as required by state law, mandatory 10% reserved for open space, 10% reserved for historic, 10% reserved for housing, the remainder in general unreserved fund that may be spent on any projects eligible for community preservation funds. And this is an annual article related to our community preservation, the Community Preservation Act, and we have a Community Preservation Commission which administers this.
Carl?
Well, this is an important thing. We work with the Mass Department of Revenue's, advice, as well as the nonprofit groups that run the statewide organization for community preservation committees, and we developed this article. It's important to make sure that we appropriately put the set-asides, and we also have to be able to have the receipts come in the fall and fund all of the projects that we're going to be seeing in the following articles.
Very
Seems
good.
pretty straightforward.
Right.
Yep.
And Article 12 goes along with this. It's also involves the Community Preservation Commission fiscal 2021 administrative and operating expenses and sets aside 5% as allowed by law to handle administrative responsibilities of the Community Preservation Commission.
Yep, that's pretty well straightforward, and we have used those funds to not only run the committee operations with the secretary and the dues that go to their professional agencies, but those funds also get used for legal expenses, surveys, consultants. It has also helped us with the Open Space Plan Committee. Both of you gentlemen were the chairman and vice chairman of that effort, and you can see how these funds were well used to support the efforts of your committee to update the open space plan, which has been done.
Okay.
Thank you, Carl.
All right. The following articles, Article 13, Article 14, Article 15, and Article 16 are all related to projects that came in front of the Community Preservation Commission and have received their recommendation. Article 13 is a recommendation of funds to continue to restore the old cemetery and rehabilitation, including tree removal, installation of retaining walls, repair of vault, records. So this is a project that was started last year. We said at that time it would probably be a 3 to 4 year project. And I believe the monies set aside for this, I'm trying to look really quick. Is it 41,000, Carl?
This one is 64,500.
Okay, I'm going to let you handle the dollar amounts.
Sure. Article 13, the value is 64,500, and it was broken down in an application that was submitted by the Cemetery Commission, working with the different volunteers that have helped them to do this work. And another good feature of this is to archive some of the records that are in an old format. They need to be modernized, and they need to be also put it in a format where they can be available online for different people doing research on genealogy or their relatives. So this article is great. It represents a lot of different things that are going to be addressed from that fund source. So we support the efforts of the Cemetery Commission, and we support the efforts of the Community Preservation Committee putting this forward.
Okay. Article 14 is something that came out of the Agricultural Commission, and these funds would help pay for the right to farm signage placed at 6 major roadways in town to promote our agricultural heritage. And they did apply for funding through the Community Preservation, and the Community Preservation Commission is forwarding Article 14 to them. And Carl, what's that amount?
That amount is $2,500, sir. It was part of a budget discussion by that Agricultural Commission that had come to a March 7th meeting with the full Select Board and Finance Committees. And it was determined at that time that it had merit, but it was suggested that they pursue this other fund source rather than tax funds to make that happen. So it's good to see that this has happened, and at some point there'll be another signage request for the open space parcels and project that the two of you were involved in. That will be coming probably to a future meeting to make sure that we can recognize all the different physical locations and properties we have out through the town. That's going online right now through a web page update on where they all are and what features and amenities they serve, as well as the different regulations that apply to each location. But there is another step to go, and that would be the adding some money for signage for those different locations and properties.
Okay, thank you. Article 15, again, a community preservation article. These funds will help continue efforts to preserve and protect headstone markers at the old cemetery. It's important to protect them from decades of exposure and weather and preserve our history. And the
Yes,
dollar amount on that.
There's 40,000 on that, and that's similar to a previous appropriation level where the volunteers have been buying the materials and working on stuff. And there was a recent attempt to do some procurement of services, but with the COVID-19 issue, that ended up being delayed. So they're back again working on that issue, and this new 40,000 is going to dovetail into that effort.
Very good. Article 16, again, another community preservation. And these represent funds for the first payout for the Congamon Lake Alum Treatment Debt Service. Our special town meeting that we held in March approved a bonding issue. Monies would be paid out of the Community Preservation Fund to cover those that debt service. And that treatment, I'm happy to report, was completed in April. And we're hoping that it'll have a life of between 20 and 25 years.
That's correct, Mr. Chairman. The Community Preservation Committee had supported an application submitted by the Select Board back in the winter because the timing of this needed to be addressed, and that's why we had that first town meeting outdoors on March 24th. $800,000 was the appropriation, $200,000 from current existing CPC money, and then $600,000 authorized. So that was to pay for the actual work. The vendor's costs alone were over $720,000 to apply the chemical, and then it was over $45,000 for the consulting engineer to oversee the project, and then there's soft costs for the attorneys and other, as well as issuance expenses coming forward soon for this other repayment. So this $70,000 represents the first year's debt service toward that $600,000 note.
Thank you, Mr. Steinhardt. All right, we're moving on to Article 17, which is basically to fund our regional school system. We're a member with Tolland and Granville. This warrant article requests approval of the assessment from the Southwick Tolland Granville Regional School District for next year's operating budget. The assessment of $11,665,880 represents the town share of the district's operating and capital costs for the upcoming fiscal year.
Yep, that's a straightforward warrant article for this year. When the school committee had come in front of the board in March, they went over their budget in detail. And as the COVID issue started to arise, they went back and held further budget meetings, and they were able to defer and reduce some of their expenses so that the net increase to the community was going to be about $113,000. So they did a good job on trying to address things over at the school district and to be reasonable with the 3 member communities.
And I'd add, we have had a tremendous working relationship with the Southwick Tolland Granville Regional District and their staff, and I thank them for that. Article 18 is a continuation. It's a warrant article requesting approval of $135,000, the borrowing that the district pursues annually to finance capital improvements and acquisitions. An affirmative vote authorizes the district to borrow funds to pay for the projects and equipment identified in the school committee's vote. Again, this relates to our regional school district.
Right, correct, Mr. Chairman. That $135,000 breaks down to $75,000 for technology, $20,000 for building improvements for replacing domestic water heaters at the Powder Mill School gym area, and then grounds improvements, $40,000 to replace the main entry concrete surface at Woodland School, which is all starting to break up and it's pitted.
Okay. 19 is something that came about through discussions with the treasurer collector and the select board, and also our financial people. This article grants permission for the establishment of quarterly tax payment system for real estate tax bill for fiscal 2022. The town's treasurer collector, outside independent auditor, and financial advisor all recommend its adoption to improve cash flow. Currently, Southwick uses a semi-annual fall-spring billing calendar pursuant to Mass DOR laws, which necessitates short-term borrowing instances and potential for cash flow problems to pay expenses until real estate tax payments are received. The overwhelming majority of towns and cities in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts use the quarterly tax billing format. I think this is pretty straightforward. It should save the taxpayers of the town of Southwick monies where we don't have to do these short-term borrowings. And I think it also would make it a little bit easier for people on a quarterly basis to take care of their real estate taxes. And anything else you'd like to add, Mr. Steinhardt?
I mean, obviously, this is for fiscal year 22 because, you know, you can't vote to adopt something on June 16th and then start it 2 weeks later. So it won't be in effect for fiscal year 21. It'll be in effect for fiscal year 22. So there'll be plenty of opportunities for setting up the system in public education efforts.
Okay. Well, that completes the 19 articles at the annual town meeting. I would add that the town moderator, along with town government, including Board of Health, Police Department, Fire Department, has been working diligently to set up the special and annual town meeting that will take place at Southwick Regional High School in the parking lot. It is going to be a little more difficult than having a meeting indoors. We're going to try to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to be heard if they'd like to be heard. I would encourage anyone with questions to try to contact town government to answer some of these questions ahead of time so that the town meeting can run very smoothly. Since it is going to be outdoors and we don't want to run out of daylight. And having said that, I'm going to move on very quickly to the town election, which is going to take place next Tuesday, June 9th. Polls are open from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. There is going to be a change. The voting is still going to be taking place at Town Hall, but it is going to be taking place in the senior center. And there was a code red phone call that went out to everyone, and hopefully we're going to send out another one to remind people. But basically, people are asked to park in the back of Town Hall. They're asked to enter using the entrance near the garage door at the rear of the building, enter the senior center through the double doors, proceed to the precinct marked on the doors, and exit using the center ramp. The reason why we're doing this is our last election, which was a special election for state senator. We found it was a little difficult for people to come in the front door of Town Hall and then exit using the stairs. We had a little problem with the elevator. So we're hoping to alleviate that to make voting easier, especially for older folks and people with disabilities. So I would encourage everyone to turn out to vote. I'd encourage everybody to go to town meeting. This is your government. This is your opportunity to have your voices heard. And with that, Mr. Steinhardt, any closing remarks?
Just take advantage of all the documents we're going to place on the town webpage at www.southwickma.org. That will represent the warrant article explanations, the town budget document, and all the town warrant documents, so that you can prepare yourselves and get as many questions answered in advance of the meeting.
All right.
All right, well, I'd like to thank both you gentlemen, Mr. Fox, Mr. Steinhardt, for your in-depth explanations. It's always good to have informed voters. Hopefully we can get this out there to as many people as possible before the town meeting so that they can review this, and if they have any questions, they can get in touch with us before the meeting. Otherwise, we're looking forward to this open air town meeting on the 16th.
Okay.
Thank you, Dennis.
Thank you.